today really is about printing from Lightroom. I can tell you, working on the development team of Lightroom, that the main reason the print module is here is because a lot of the engineers are Canon shooters and Epson printers, and they were pretty dissatisfied with the interface and essentially developed their own interface. Printing has always been a disaster for me, something that was incredibly time-consuming and tough, and I actually adore printing out of Lightroom. Everything is super easy. There is one critical thing I want to go over first, just as a preface to all this, which is a little comment on what I call the digital ineptitude of everyone wanting things at 300 DPI and Adobe 98. And I want to just do a quick little demo of why just giving one coordinate or 300 DPI, why that's sort of irrelevant, and talk a little bit about native output space, and then we'll get into Lightroom part of it. So I'm just going to open up an image here, and we'll open this up in Photoshop. And if I go to image size, you'll see right now that this is a 62.9 meg image. And I make a little bit of a joke because I always tell people that when you're working in Photoshop or Lightroom with an image, it's all about what your was and is. And as long as your was is what it was, then you haven't changed anything. And what I mean by that is that if I uncheck resample and I change this now to 4,000 PPI, at 4,000 PPI, I haven't changed anything because my was and my is still what it was. My output size is 0.6 of an inch by 1 inch, but in the same respects, and again, this is a little pet peeve of mine when dealing with picture editors and art directors, because most people would, God forbid you ever sent an image in at 4 PPI, but at 4 PPI, I haven't done anything. At 4 PPI, this image is unchanged, and it's unchanged unless I change resampling. So what I am talking about, and this is critical because so many people ask for something, they say 300 DPI, and my own pet peeves are the following. First of all, it's PPI, pixels per inch. DPI is dots per inch as it relates to ink going on paper. And then there's LPI, which is lines per inch as in ink going onto a printer. And by the way, the standard for most presses in the US is still a 133 line screen, and the formula we pretty much use is 1.5 times that resolution, or 200. If we go to 2 times, we end up with a number of 266. But rarely, actually, is it truly 300. So if I change this, we are at 144. If I make this now 300, sorry. And now we change a coordinate, so I make it 17 inches wide, you'll see now that my was and isn't what it was, as I like to say. And it's only when your is and was is different that you've altered the image. And this is an absolutely critical fact in terms of printing and in terms of client delivery, because the resolution by itself is really irrelevant unless we have altered the image. Now, second component, the best output for an image is going to be at its native resolution. So something else that people get wrong is that if I was going to make a 5x7, for example, you'll see that, and by the way, on an Epson printer, the Epson printers can take any resolution essentially from 180 to 360 and 480 if it's glossy paper. So most people believe that to make an image print it small, you need just a little resolution, and to print it large, you need lots of resolution. And it's actually a polar opposite. So if I wanted to make a 5x7, you'll see at 480, I have very close to a 5x7. And that is going to give me a far better 5x7 than if I resampled this and outputted this at, say, 180, which now, again, my was and my is, in this case, my is, you know, 1/5 or so of what my was. Same respect, if I'm going to make a big image, you'll see that at 180, I already have a 15 by 22. And again, that's at native resolution. And the best reproduction we're going to get is actually at the native resolution without upresing or downresing. If I have to upres, and that's something I like people to know, that you know there are times obviously where you have to. If you're going to make a very large print and you do not have a resolution equivalent of 180, I will upres. And my choice for my choice for upresing is Perfect Resize, formerly known as Genuine Fractals, to get that upres. But I will only upres to the minimum resolution needed to obtain that maximum output. So we'll take questions, I guess, later on all this. But this whole concept is really something that a lot of people mess up right from the start, and it's going to come into play when we go through printing in Lightroom. So let me close this out. Let's open up Lightroom. And I'm going to go to the library for a minute. And I'm going to work with a particular image. Let me just unselect all here. And the image I think we'll work with is probably this one, which I actually did print already, and quite an interesting image. So to get to the print module, I click on Print. And the neat thing about the print module is that while Develop module and the Library module are fairly tough to figure out, the good news about print is that Slideshow, Print, and Web are actually quite similar. So I want to take you through the dialog boxes first, and then we'll get into the technicals of exactly how to go about doing all this. So on the left side, we have templates that come with Lightroom. We can pick, you know, an 8 by 10. We can pick 4 by 5 contact sheets. We can pick a, you know, 6 2 by 3s and 1 4 by 6. Then there are user templates. So, for example, my 7900 on luster paper, 24 by 30. The other thing that we have on the left side, which is highly useful, is the ability to pick from collections. So the collections are really neat to have in these modules, because if I pick images from multiple folders, the easiest thing to do is to make a collection or a smart collection of that information, and then I have all of that info available. Moving down, and I'm going to come back to page setup and print settings in a little bit. The only other thing I want to point out is that one sort of what I like to refer to as bug feature. Bug features are things that the engineers think are a feature and some of us think are a bug. But if you select, let's say, one image or two images to print in the grid in the library, the default setting for underneath here is actually all film strip photos. So it is one thing I always tell people in terms of printing out of Lightroom: if you have one image selected or two selected, first thing you want to check is right down here to see what it says, because you're probably going to want to set that to selected photos, or when you hit print, you're going to find you're using an extraordinary amount of ink and paper. On the left side, at the bottom, and again on the bottom left, page setup. This is where we pick our printer and our paper type. And I will show you something very, very cool about this in a minute. But I have chosen for today my 7900 and 24 by 30 inch paper. What's very cool is that these settings, if I choose OK and I make a custom template or a user template, if you will, the settings for both page setup, print settings, and everything I have on the right side are all saved at the same time, which is really, really something enjoyable, because in Photoshop, those of you who have played in Photoshop know things like centering the image and saving these settings. A lot of times they don't save, and you end up spending an inordinate amount of time just going through these dialog boxes. So on the next to page setup, we have print settings, the area for much confusion. And in print settings, the key is the following. Again, I pick my printer up here, and then the most important one for me is to go down to printer settings. And under printer settings, we make some specific choices. I'm going to pick my media type. In this case, it's premium luster photo paper. The HDR inks, if you're on a Mac, you can actually output in 16-bit. Actually, if you're on an Intel Mac, you can output in 16-bit. The very critical one is this one right here. Choices being color controls, letting Epson run letting the driver run the printer, but the correct choice in my mind is off, no color management, meaning that Lightroom and or Photoshop will be running the color. I'm going to choose 1440 for my output, and microwave, which is just giving me a little finer detail. By the way, just as a tidbit, I notice a lot of people always choose finest detail. Finest detail really is for things like print on an image, or non-image detail. So those are my basic choices for the driver. And again, I can choose save, and the neat part is that these can be saved as part of a user template, which I'm going to show you again in a little bit. On the right side, we have the ability to do single image, or picture package, or custom package. So kind of neat, and I'll just give a quick little explanation of this. If I choose custom package, for example, I can take an image from here, and actually a raw file, which is very cool. So I can take a raw file and put it in, and I can scale it in live time, move it where I want it. I can pick another file, and again, very neat that I can actually take a work from a raw file, and I'm not working from a JPEG or a TIFF. And we can scale this. Let me just make that a little smaller, move that down, and so on and so forth. So that's a custom package. Today I'm going to be working with what I like, which is single image, and actually we're going to work with this image. Then moving down, we have image settings. Zoom to fill, self-explanatory. It will fill. One of the things that I absolutely adore about Lightroom, and I don't know how many of you are in this boat, but I can't count the times that I've done the wrong orientation on an image and didn't figure it out until I wasted half the paper. So one of the very cool things in Lightroom is rotate the fit. So if with rotate the fit on, it will automatically rotate the image to fit the paper correctly. Very, very cool feature. If you want to put a border around the image, that is stroke border, we can increase the size of the border with a slider. We can change the color of the border with this color panel. And to get colors, by the way, we would click here. Then we can pick something like, a hideous green or something of that nature if we so desire to put around this image. I am going to go back to just black. And I'll keep it at 2. So I'll move the slider down here. Then underneath that, we also have the ability to control both margins and the cell size. And a little bit of confusion. It is important to understand, because people assume this is where they're setting their paper size. Not true. You're setting your paper size over here under print settings. These are configurations once we have the paper size. So this is setting my left margin, for example, and again, my right margin, top margin, and bottom margin. And we can either type in numbers or use the sliders. We have a page grid and columns. And then also highly useful is the cell size. So with the cell size is where I can control the size the image is going to appear on a given sheet of paper. So again, if I take this down, you'll see that I can control how big that's going to be, and again, controlling width this way. So if I wanted to print this image small but on a large sheet of paper, that's exactly where I would do it from. Let me scale this back up again. Probably one of the coolest things is something that is coming up. And under show guides, we have some things that are, like rulers, not that important to me, but nonetheless. Page bleeds, margins and gutters, image cells. All those are okay, but the one that I like the best is the one that in my mind is in the wrong place. And I'm going to come back to it in a little while, but it's called dimensions. And again, I will come back to that in a little bit. So moving down, we can change the background color of the page. If you didn't want a white background, you click here, and again, you can pick some other color for your background. I don't tend to ever do this, but nice to have that option if you so desired. We can add an identity plate, and I'll try to do this without laughing. The identity plate is you create in Lightroom. We can manually move it this way. We can scale it. We can change the opacity. We can, again, scale it with a slider. And one of my favorite for what I call I don't get is the ability to render this behind the image like that. And when I first saw this, here we go, just like that. So when I first saw this, this is a very funny sidebar story. I thought that the idea of this might even be something like proving that I printed it. The idea being that if I printed this behind the image completely, maybe it was a way that if I wanted to waste a sheet of paper, I could scrape the ink off and see that my watermark, per se, was underneath. But that's totally not what it's for. It is really a visual thing that if you wanted to have your logo coming out from the side of your image, that you can actually do that. Pretty amazing, because it's not something I would ever want to do, but it's there if you so desired. And then I'm going to uncheck identity plate for a minute. We also have the ability to add watermarking, and you can pick there is a watermark editor. So if you were to open up the watermark editor, this is where you can edit your watermark from. Very neat. We can create a watermark with drop-down shadows. We can change the placement of it. This is new in Lightroom 3. We can save a bunch of different ones, and all of them then would be available from this drop-down menu. We can add page options, so the ability to add all kinds of information from page numbers to page info to crop marks. Under photo information, we have a drop-down menu. We can add pretty much any and all metadata, so I can add a caption, exposure, file name, all kinds of odds and ends there. Let me uncheck this for a second. And then where I was going before under resolution. So the most normal thing that people do, which is not the way Lightroom is designed, is they check print resolution here. The default is 240, and then they do things like uprez it to 300 or so on and so forth. And they uprez it without actually understanding that that is not at all ideal. What we really want to have is the native resolution, and on an Epson printer, We want to output it at any resolution from 180 to 360 and 480 if it's glossy. So a really neat little tool that most people don't realize because it's sort of in the wrong dialog box, but the correct way is to uncheck print resolution and then to come up here under show guides and check dimensions. And by checking dimensions, you'll see that it will show you the output resolution right in the dialog box. So for example, if I were to make this image smaller on the sheet of paper, you'll see right now I am at 15.443 at 23.109, and my output resolution is 198. If I make it smaller, I'm at 221. Now, I happen to be printing very large today. Again, making it smaller, you'll see it increase. So as we go down, there's 237, there's 258, there's 278. But to me, this is one of the coolest things in here because it allows me, especially from a raw file or from a TIFF file, to process an image actually at that native resolution, which is ideal. My choice is that I want to have a resolution of 180 or greater to print on my Epson printer. And this particular image, and we're making it very large, and you'll see that, let me just go back to my preset here for 1 second so I can get things set up. So you'll see that right now I'm at 170 PPI at 18 by 27. So this image needs a little bit of uprezing. So this is very cool because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this image, I'm going to go to the develop module for a minute, and I'm going to export this image to CS5. I'm going to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and I'm going to go into Perfect Resize. So let me open up Perfect Resize. Just going to take a moment here because I am doing this on full-size images. And let's see. There we go. So the neat part is that, let me just show you both screens here for a second. I'm going to go back to the library. Let's close this out. Go back to the library module for print module rather for a second. And you'll see that I want to output at 18.043 at 27 inches, but I need a resolution of 180. So what I can do here is I can put in my size requirement right here in inches. I'm going to put in 18.043. Actually, I made a mistake there. I put it in the wrong box. These things happen when you're doing this live. Stop spinning. I swapped that out. So actually, we're actually putting in 27. My mistake. So 27 and 180. Let's go to 180. And I apologize for the spinning. Probably an issue of bandwidth right here and the fact that it is a very large file. We'll change that though to 180. We'll change that to 180. 1800. I love that. Let's try that again. My response is slow here. So let's try that again. 180. And we'll hit return. And I don't know why we're having an issue. Again, it's probably just because of the bandwidth. There we go. Okay. And I still screwed this up because I am 27 on the width. So, but that's all right. We're actually we'll make this even larger then. So, Perfect Resize is going to size this image. And then when it's done, the neat part about this is I can hit save, not save as, and it's going to save directly back into Lightroom. And again, I actually messed up my width and height on that. But if I hit save now, and again, not save as, but save, it's going to save right back into Lightroom next to the original. Here we go. And now, and it's just compiling. Wonderful. There we go. So now I can actually go full size if I want, and you'll see that I actually have 270 for my PPI. Again, my mistake there, I put in the wrong axis. I really would have wanted to have that come out at 180, but you get the point anyways. And very, very neat to have that option and to be able to go from, in essence, from Lightroom to Photoshop, go into Perfect Resize, then go back to Lightroom to output this file. And the quality is truly rather amazing. Now, a couple of other things before we take any questions. Then, again, important to note, I am not putting in resolution here. Instead, I am using dimensions, and I'm seeing what those dimensions are here. And again, if I make this even bigger so that we bring our margins to 0, and we go full, you'll see that I'm still at 245, which is actually quite okay. Really, I need 180 for this image to print accurately. Then some other things that are pretty cool. We can pick sharpening. This is output sharpening, not capture sharpening. So this is where we are taking pixels and converting them to dots. And for this particular image, we actually have fairly high frequency and fairly defined light and dark edges. And I'm going to pick high sharpening and 16-bit output. And then down here under color management is the critical part where we pick our profile. And you'll see I've already picked my profile for the Epson Stylus Pro 9900 for premium luster paper. If I loaded other profiles, this is where I can access them from by hitting other, and then the my ICC profiles will open up, and I can go through and pick any other profile I want. This is exactly where we get our profiles from. Then we have a choice of perceptual and or relative colorimetric, and I like to tell people that my sort of concept for those, perceptual is generally strong saturated colors in simple English, and relative colorimetric is muted earth tones. When I've never gotten a sunburn, but when I moved to South Beach, I laid out on the beach for 3 or 4 days with Hawaiian Tropic, and I was the exact description of perceptual. Native American skin typically maps out to be very close to relative colorimetric, and one of the problems a human skin is actually so hard to get accurate is that most of us are not either relative colorimetric or perceptual, and that's sort of the little point behind that. And then after I do all this, I can go in and choose print, print one, so on and so forth. Now, a couple of other neat little things. We have the ability, there's also draft mode printing, which is kind of cool. And draft mode printing, I can take a few images. I can take actually a bunch of images. I can go into draft mode printing, and I can choose print and actually print as a PDF. So save it as a PDF, and save it with PDF security, which means that I can lock out copying, I can lock out printing, I can even send you a document so that I can either block editing of the document or even block the opening of the document, meaning that when you pay me, because I know that the check is in the mail, when the check actually gets there, you get the password to open up the corresponding document, all of which is actually very cool. To have the feature of PDF security, you need the full version of Adobe Acrobat. To read it, you just need Reader. So let me cancel this out. And then I want to show you, I think, what is one of the coolest things in the print module of all, which is that once we set something and we have a group of settings on the right side that we like, we can come over on the left side and go to the template browser and create a template based on those settings, and those settings will control everything. So watch, because this is actually, to me, what makes this so absolutely cool. If I go to my 3800 on Exhibition Fiber, actually let's just pick this image for a minute, and we go to 3800 on Exhibition Fiber, you'll see on the right side, it is part of what's saving, is it's giving the ability to save even the correct profile for Exhibition Fiber. If I were to go to page setup, it is changed to the 3800. Same thing with print settings. Whereas if I now go and choose my 7900 on Premium Luster, you'll see that the profile is put in correctly here. Everything that I've set up here is put in correctly, and the page setup, the correct printer is set up. So what's really neat is that once you've gone through the trouble of setting this up once, you then make a template, and then the next time you go to print, it's pretty much, in many ways, as easy as simply clicking on the other image, clicking the template you're saving, and choosing print. Now, there's one little thing that is missing in Lightroom that that many of us hope is in a future version, and that's soft proofing. Soft proofing being that I think most people believe inaccurately that what it looks like on screen is exactly what it's supposed to look like in print. And that's absolutely not the case. What it's supposed to look like in print is what it will look like when we have the correct ICC profile and a gamut warning. So one little thing that's neat, although the Epson profiles are very, very, very good, and I would say that the majority of times I actually do print it and it comes out just fine. My own little technique for doing soft proofing is that what I'll do is I make a collection called print, and what I'll do is I'll take an image and I'll make a virtual copy of that image. Command apostrophe makes a virtual copy. It's not making another image, it's just making in essence a copy of the metadata. And then if the image prints like a little dark, what I'll do is I'll tweak the virtual copy a little bit. So maybe increase brightness, which is sort of my midtones, or whatever needs to be done, and then save that file, take that tweaked file, store it in print, so print becomes my, this little collection becomes sort of my soft-proofed images, if you will, to work with. And really, it is really, really amazing. The last show I printed, and I really waited until the last minute to print this show, I eventually got to the point where I locked myself in a room and said, okay, the day has come and I'm going to spend a week making these prints. And I picked my images, I set up everything on both sides accurately, and then I started printing. And it took me a day, about a day totally, to make 24 exhibition prints. Most of them were actually good in the first print. There were about 2 or 3 that I had to make a second or third print on. And bottom line is that printing is a dream. My new printer, the 7900, came this week, just before I left for LA to teach a workshop. I had it out of the box, set up, and made a print in about 15 minutes, which is really a testament to where all this stuff has come. Truly amazing. So it's 3:47. What I want to say, and then we'll take questions, is I teach workshops on workflow, and we do one in a different city every month. Our website is D as in David 65, the letter D and the number 6 and the number 5, d65.com. You'll find our schedule in there. I'm doing. We also do our own webinars, and I'll be doing a webinar once a month here with onOne. I hope you enjoy this, and let's open it up for some questions, if that's okay, and see what everyone has to say.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. So there are some questions. There were a few questions in terms of matching up the actual paper to the media type, so glossy or matte, and how that's relative to the print output. So can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, some of it, it's something that I've said to Epson at times that is confusing. The good news is, most of these things come with manuals. Those are the things that photographers typically never take out of the plastic. It's usually there with the warranty card. And the good news about most of the papers, at least from Epson, it will tell you what media type it is, because sometimes it doesn't always make 100% sense that you are picking a glossy media type for a paper that you may not think is glossy, so to speak. While I could go through and tell you which ones are for which, they really are listed on those paper diagrams, on the little charts that come with the paper. Most people never open that stuff up, and for Epson, they list all that on their website as well.
Cool. There are a bunch of questions about soft proofing, whether you do it, how do you do it. There's actually a decent number of them. So is there anything you could talk about soft proofing?
Yeah. So let me go back to prints for a minute. So this is a perfect example. This was my original. Actually, let me just set it up because this was done on a 3800 exhibition fiber. So this is an image that has it has a very unusual gamut, and there are very strong saturated oranges, and the gown that this monk is wearing is sort of a turquoise. The tones in the bottom are brown. It's an image that I knew would be sort of difficult to get accurately in print. So I make my adjustments as I will in Lightroom, and this is really how I want the image to look. I go to print it. I do a test print. Actually, another thing you can do is there's a piece of software called ColorThink, and one thing I'll typically do is take the profile for the ink and paper, drop it into ColorThink with the image, and you can actually see what's in gamut and what's out of gamut. And in this case, what it really came down to is that the image, the colors actually worked out pretty well. The image was really just printing slightly dark, and part of that was due to the gamut. So I go into Lightroom. I make a virtual copy, and then I adjust the virtual copy a little bit, just basically increasing brightness to compensate for the dark printing. Print it again, and it was dead on the money. So it's not a true soft proofing. It's basically a visual interpretation and making adjustments. But the way that I do it is I don't want to make those adjustments to the original because the original is actually fine just the way I want it. So I make those adjustments to the virtual copy, and it really works very, very well.
Cool. In terms of ICC profiles, do you recommend people go out? So let's say someone wants to send an image. Most people don't necessarily have those extremely high-end Epson printers. They send them out. Do you recommend get them going to the print shop's website, say, and downloading the custom ICC profiles that are provide?
Absolutely, and I will tell you, and this is not a plug for them because I'm sort of despised by the concept, but it is a real reality. Is that one of the best like all-around labs you're going to find is Costco, and the reason is that if you go on drycreekphoto.com, you can download. You'll see what printers they're using at your local Costco. You can download the profiles from those printers. They're updated regularly. Tag your image with that, reload it up to Costco, and for a ridiculously small amount of money, you'll get a really exceptional print that in many times will be as good, if not better, than your local custom photo lab. While I personally, want to give the business to myself or my local lab, I will say that the Costco printing is really incredible. But yes, and the same thing when you're choosing different papers. One of the sort of requirements I have in the back of my own mind is I watch photographers go into a photo store to pick paper, and so many photographers they go up and they want to feel, and they simply feel the paper and they go, oh, this is awesome. Well, the feel of the paper is certainly important, to know if it's a heavyweight or rag and whatnot. But the thing that I really want to see is how my image is going to reproduce in that paper. So to me, that ICC profile is really critical. I like to use ColorThink and actually, dump the image into ColorThink and look at the profile. But at the very least, I would hope that the manufacturer of the paper at least supplies free profiles to play with. If you want to bump it up a notch, I use X-Rate's onOne photo, and you can make your own profiles. But a lot of the profiles from the paper companies are actually very, very good.
So you actually answered a question I was about to ask. You use the onOne display to calibrate your display.
Correct. Yes, I should have. It is all of this stuff in terms of getting an accurate print. It is critical. I mean, point one is it's absolutely critical to start out with a profiled display, because if it isn't profiled accurately, you really have no base and no starting point to know what's what. And the only point where I think it's not needed is if you had a closed system. So if the only thing I'm doing is printing myself, and I know that I have to add magenta and I have to add this and I have to do that, and when I do, the print looks great, then you actually have your own color management. The problem with that concept is that if you're doing that and you send it to someone else, it's going to look all messed up. So really, as a starting point to profile, and I'm pretty anal about profiling. I actually profile every time I'm going to work in Photoshop or Lightroom where I have to do something accurate, just so that I actually can give a real color guarantee.
Gotcha. And in the field, do you use like a color target, like a color checker passport, to create a custom profile?
When I went to Africa, I took my passport, and I actually also took a little X-ray display to tweak my laptop as best as I could. But the passport is definitely part of my repertoire. I'm a firm believer in it. I think the thing that it does for me the best is, again, it gives me a starting point for all those patches. That's great. And one of the things that I found that I really liked about it is that I shoot with multiple cameras, and I was very disappointed in the beginning to find that if I had two brand new 1DS Mark IIIs, and with the same lens I shot the same exact subject, the images actually were different from each camera because every sensor is slightly different. So using the passport, I was able to basically bring each camera into a known standard, so I can swap cameras back and forth, and the output looks exactly the same.
Got it. And I agree with you. I can't stress enough the importance, one, of doing display calibration, and to what you said.
And if I can
especially
add one thing to that, Brian. I mean, living in
Sure.
Miami Beach, we have just about every day this time of year there's a fashion shoot down on the beach, And unfortunately, a lot of photographers have a lot of this equipment, but they actually don't know how to use it. And I love photographing at sunrise and sunset, and I'll see photographers go out at sunrise or sunset, and the first thing they do is they take a color checker passport, and they're also not realizing that they're neutralizing, in essence, in the process, the whole reason that they're there at sunrise and sunset. So they are fabulous, fabulous tools, but it's critical to understand what it is a tool like that is doing and when you're going to use it and what you're going to use it for, and not just automatically use something because someone told you it's good to use.
Um,
Not that I'm
Absolutely agreed.
pontificating.
It's well, I mean, I know I'm definitely biased to X-Ray because one of my closest friends, he's like a brother to me, is a product manager there.
Right.
He actually created the passport, and so I use the Color Monkey and to
Right.
display to calibrate my displays, and I use a color checker passport just like you in the field. So I do recommend and you don't have to go gangbusters and get the best. The Color Monkey is one of the higher end display calibrators. You can get something lower end, but to Seth's point, you want to have a baseline for your display. If your display has the manufacturer's calibration, you're automatically skewed. You're kind of on a tilted playing field. So that's just what I wanted to say there. I wanted to ask you, Seth. There was a question about color space.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
if yeah, like sRGB or Adobe RGB or ProPhoto.
Yeah. So I'll give you my quick color spaces are like containers of Crayola crayons, and on the low end we have sRGB, which I won't tell you what it stands for on this wavelength, but to be politically correct, we could say satanic RGB. And then there's Adobe 98, which is a much bigger space. And for the most part, the industry uses Adobe 98 as a standard. But in my mind, it's more of a standard that was applicable in a film-based world. And what's really nice, the develop module, the default of the develop module in Lightroom is actually a ProPhoto variant. And if you think about it as boxes of Crayola crayons, sRGB is like the free box of crayons you got in kindergarten. Adobe 98 is like a bigger box of crayons with all the neat colors like tangerine and whatnot. And ProPhoto is just sort of like going to the Crayola factory and taking a dump truck and saying, give me every color that you have. ProPhoto is a huge, huge color space. And the naysayers say, why do you bother with ProPhoto when your monitor can't display it? But in the same respects, just a few years back, monitors only displayed sRGB. And now we have many monitors that will display color spaces very close to, if not beyond, Adobe 98. And in the future, those will get broader and broader. In the same respects, ink combinations, the HDR inks from Epson will actually display color beyond the boundaries of Adobe 98. So I feed my Epson printer images in the ProPhoto color space. I am not going to get all of ProPhoto by any means, but I can definitely get color that is well beyond the boundaries of Adobe 98. And you'll see it in a lot of those shades that people have, tough times printing. Some of the blues, some of the browns, some of the oranges are suddenly reproducible by using these larger color spaces. I would never deliver to any client unless I know clearly that they have an understanding of this. I would never deliver in ProPhoto. I typically actually deliver, if it's for the web, I'm going to deliver in sRGB. My choice for delivery for print most of the time is actually color match RGB, because color match is actually already fairly close to CMYK. And I find, in all honesty, that most clients actually can't screw it up. But I rarely actually deliver anything in Adobe 98. So there's my little color pontification.
That actually, I actually learned a bit from that too. So thank
Okay.
you for. Um,
And I
with
apologize
regards
for
to
any
sharpening,
background noise here. My 3-year-old just woke up from nap time, so.
that's real life. That's the sound of real life. Um, with regards to sharpening, do you sharpen on output? Do you ever like pre-sharpen
So,
when you
so
process?
people get sharpening all wrong. There is capture sharpening, which is critical. Capture sharpening, we are getting in essence, the 3 beams of light, um, red, green, and blue, to be sharp from capture. The higher the megapixel camera, typically the more sharpening the image needs. But that's capture sharpening, very different from 2 other types of sharpening. One is creative sharpening, like sharpening the eye and smoothing the skin. And then finally, output sharpening, which is taking ink and going on paper. And I guess the best explanation that I can give of it in simple English without getting into, algorithms and all that is that, and I think a way that a lot of people then understand it is that if we were to take a piece of watercolor paper and you put ink on it, the tendency is that A is going to take a lot of ink, and the ink is going to want to naturally spread out. So each side of each pixel is tending to bleed into the pixel next to it. We make a very subtle adjustment, and we take a piece of glossy paper, and now it takes very little ink, and the ink wants to bead up, not spread out. That simple difference between those 2 paper types is an entirely different type of sharpening for one to the other. It's depending on both what we call frequency of the image, or how much detail is there, and then this line definition, light and dark borders, as well as the type of paper. So, I mean, a lot of people just really, it's the old days of when it comes to sharpening, they just do unsharp mask and they do one thing and they think it accommodates all 3 of those components. But really, I mean, sharpening is a whole ball game in itself.
It's interesting actually because there are a lot of preconceived notions of what you need to do for sharpening.
Yeah, and it makes a
And I know
very, very big difference.
right, and I mean I know Lightroom builds it into their export presets.
Correct.
Every time you export, there's a right there based on screen or glossy or matte and low, medium, and high, and so that's actually really good to know too. There is, I mean, so much to this whole print theory and color theory that and it's very
Yeah, we could
hard
go on for
because
days.
right, and for the most part, manufacturers, camera manufacturers, print manufacturers, display manufacturers want to try to appease the most amount of people in the easiest possible way, and um, that's why there are different grades of products and different just skill sets with this. So now people are asking for webinars on sharpening.
Right.
Excellent. If actually, there's a really good question here that just came in
It's
terms
something
of
we
color
cover in our
management.
workshops, if I can put in a plug there.
There you go. I'll give the website out in a second.
Okay.
Seth's workshop program, there is a sharpening class that you can
We actually
attend.
spend the whole day,
Is there
almost a half a day on printing.
awesome? That's good to know. Is there a book or is there any resource you could recommend on color management? And also before that, you had mentioned a website to get the profile for
Yeah, the
Costco.
profile
People,
for Costco is drycreekphoto.com, DRYCREEK, drycreekphoto.com. And to
let
learn
me.
more just about color management in general, I think the 2 greatest resources out there, one is Andrew Rodney, digitaldog.net. He has a wonderful book on color management, as does another partner of mine from Pixel Genius, who passed away. I think probably the leading expert in the entire world ever was Bruce Frazier. And Bruce Frazier still has a book called Real World Color Management that is sort of like the Bible on all this stuff.
Cool. I just posted the website as well as Andrew Rodney's and Bruce Frazier's names in the chat module. So guys,
yeah, and you can
attendees, just go.
Actually, you can find little bits on all of us from the other hat that I wear, which is Pixel Genius, and we also make a sharpening plugin as well. one of my
Cool.
many hats.
And you're doing a focus on nature seminar in Iceland this summer?
I just came back from Botswana. We're doing a workshop in Iceland. I'm doing a workshop this year in Santa Fe. We're taking a group to Antarctica. We're trying to set up a trip to Greenland and trying to set up 2 more trips possibly for Africa. So a busy traveling schedule, but lots of shooting. Good stuff.
That, that's excellent. We have Einar on the is attending as well, so
Okay.
he says hi. Um, so let me do this. We've got just here's a quick random question. You mentioned Costco as terms of one of those big box stores. Can you recommend where people can get the color profile for Sam's Club?
I don't know. Uh, the funny part about it is that that whole Costco business concept. Essentially, they were losing money, and the irony is that in order to address that they were losing money, they actually went about doing this stuff the correct way, and they really deployed what it really comes down to is color management. And for the most part, in dealing with any local lab or even what you would think is a high-end, your high-end commercial photo lab, don't assume that they all know what they're doing, because a lot of them actually do strip out the profile, assign their own profile, and start making tweaks when it's not needed. I have a little standard question, which if I'm going to any lab, and I won't mention names of labs, but some of the largest in this country, and I asked if they can take an image in Pro Photo, and one of the most well-known labs out there, the lab manager told me they're very familiar with those kinds of lights. And I sort of chuckled to myself, and I said, I'm not talking about the lights called Pro Photo. I'm talking about a color space. But point is that this is an area where there's a need for a lot of education. There's not a whole lot of information out on it, and a lot of people are doing a guessing game instead of really doing it accurately.